Well, the fifth criteria for highly effective lesson design, at least from the perspective of the research that we have investigated, it is really interesting to me because I think it tends to be an issue that's feast or famine for most math teachers when they design a lesson. And what do I mean by that? Well, it deals with the discourse and the nature of the discourse. So most math lessons are one of two kinds of discourse. One is whole group discourse, where the teacher is talking and directing the instruction and leading the thoughts and the ideas and helping from the front of the room, usually, sometimes with an overhead projector or a docu-cam or perhaps some type of computer device. But they're leading the work, they're describing the problems, they're teaching the students, as they should, and you need to do that. The other type of discourse is what we call small group discourse, or students in peer-to-peer discourse, 2s and 3s and 4s, 5s, working together on a problem in peer-to-peer discussion. And it's really funny because I used to think it was about communication. The word discourse actually means so much more, because discourse assumes the students are actively engaged completely in whatever the prompt or the problem is that the teacher presented. Now, I mentioned that it's sort of a feast and famine issue because for a lot of teachers, it's either, oh, I just got to get through this, so I'm going to teach the lesson, so I'm going to just plow through it and show the examples and get them to the place where they can, get out of here and get the homework done. For other teachers, sometimes it's like this exploratory lesson the whole time, and then what happens is there's never any direct instruction that pulls it together, makes the kids aware of what they were supposed to be learning. They're just sort of playing in these problems, and there's no understanding of, well, what was it I was supposed to have learned? I just did the bouncing ball problem. Well, great, what does that mean? So the either extreme is bad. What we now know is the best instruction really is what I call small step instruction. And before I describe that, let me just say this. There's quite a bit of evidence in the brain research. Gregory Yates is a neuroscientist who wrote a book with John Hattie called Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn. In that book, they talk about the fact that we don't mean to, but when we're being talked to for too long of a period of time, what happens is this process in our brain called cascading inattention. And I just love that phrase because I'm guilty of it too. I can be somewhere sometime listening to a lecture, and all of a sudden my brain just says, don't listen anymore, it's too complex, and I'll start thinking about other things, or I'll start writing notes about my grocery list or whatever because I'm getting overwhelmed. Well, the brain intentionally does that. And so for kids in a math class, once the information coming from the teacher's mouth is too overwhelming, too complex, what will happen is it's cascading inattention kicks in, and they don't mean to not be paying attention. And their studies basically show that roughly we've got about 8 to 10 minutes before we need to release the class from whole group discourse and put the class and the lesson design into small group discourse. So ideally our lessons would have this wonderful blend of me teaching for a little bit and kind of directing their thoughts and setting it up, and then giving them some prompts, letting them engage in small group discourse while I come around and see and hear what they do, and then come back and pull it together and then let them get back, and there's sort of this beautiful back and forth. Now, that's hard to manage, and you've got to really be a master at getting their attention and also giving them clear prompts so that they understand what to do when they're being asked to work together. And obviously that management is a pretty big deal. I get that. But this commitment to small group discourse now, and that level of student communication, the impact on student learning is significant. But here's why. It's only significant if it's used. I wonder sometimes what any of us think of when we think of the phrase formative assessment as part of instruction. So to explain that, I think I have to explain this. You cannot do formative assessment from the front of the room. You can do checks for understanding. You can ask kids to raise their hands. You can ask them to hold up whiteboards. But you can't do a formative assessment because formative assessment assumes, number one, that there will be feedback. So kids work on a problem and you give them feedback. You can give a few kids feedback from the front of the room, the ones you call on, but all the other kids, you have no idea. They're not getting feedback on their thought process at all. So when you put them onto a problem and you ask them to engage in doing the math work on the problem as you come around and watch them work, what's your job now? Well, your job is to be the feedback provider, to participate and facilitate the formative learning. So the students are learning this idea for the first time, this math concept. You've chosen this problem to help them learn it. You come out now and you start giving their teams, as they're working together on it, based on what you're hearing them do. And this is what we call scaffolding. So you're going to give them a scaffolding prompt, or I call them unstucking prompts. I'm reluctant to almost say that on a video like this for you because unstucking prompts isn't a research affirmed term, but I just love it. Your job is to go out and unstick them, and any place where they're stuck, you're going to give them a scaffolding prompt down. Maybe they're stuck on language. Maybe they're stuck on they don't know what the word contradicts means. Maybe they're stuck on the fact that they've never seen this notation before. They can't remember it, and it's from so long ago, and you have to prompt them on that. Maybe they're just stuck on a solution pathway, and their strategy just isn't working, and you've got to enter them into a different strategy. So the whole point is, your job is to not do the problem for them, but to give them an unstucking prompt that will keep them persevering. And then I might go over here to a different group, and they've nailed the problem. And by the way, when I gave that group an unstucking prompt, an assessing question, no one else heard me do that because they're all working. So they got an intervention. Critical question 3 during a lesson is, what will be my response when you're not learning? My answer to that is, I'm going to give you an unstucking prompt. I'm going to give you a scaffolding prompt. But then I come over here and there's a group of kids that have nailed the problem. They're just sort of sitting there waiting. So what I do with them is I give them an advancing prompt. I give them something that goes a little deeper on the problem, which is actually critical question 4. What will be my response during class if you are learning? Well, number 1, I'm going to find out if you are. And then number 2, I'm going to give you a little advancing prompt on the problem. And the thing I want math teachers to know is this. When we talk about differentiated instruction, and actually instructional coaches need to know this too. When we talk about differentiated instruction in the math classroom, we are not talking about a different lesson for different children. We are talking about differentiation on the math problems I've chosen to help you learn the standard. We all need to learn the standard. We all need to do these tasks. Some of you I will scaffold down and give you intervention on the task. Others of you may need some advancing, so I'll give you that. But we'll all learn at least this body of questions. So I really want to encourage you to understand that role as facilitator. And then the last thing to know, though, it's the hard part, because the kids actually have to get involved. If I go into a group of students and I give them some wonderful feedback, scaffolding or advancing feedback, and I walk away and they just sit there, they don't do anything, shame on them, because then there's no learning for the child. If you give them feedback and they don't take action, it's called taking action. To be formative, I have to try, I have to get feedback, and then I have to take action on that feedback. If I don't take action on the feedback, then for the child, Dylan, William, and others will say the learning stops. So you and I have to be really clear, you must act on this feedback or pay for it with my wrath the next time I see you. So I think if that's the idea, small group discourse isn't just because you need to create an active class of kids talking, which is helpful. It's really designed for them to participate in a formative learning process while you, the expert, can guide that feedback. So if we could do that, that's really what Criteria 5 is all about, is just making sure during my lesson I have this balance of whole group and small group discourse.